Dan Bublin's Comedy Productions.
My friend Dan, he's got a podcast, 'cause all comics need a podcast, and nobody had a podcast called The Art of Bombing. So Dan went out and bought a tape deck. Who knows why he bought a tape deck? Podcasts don't get played on tape decks, but Dan is from the 80s. So hey there, all you funny jerks, come talk to Dan about your work. Tell him all about your worst times. It's The Art of Bombing.
Welcome to an all-new episode of The Art of Bombing presents Between Bombs, Callbacks, where Josh and I call back the most recent episode. This week we are calling back episode 291 with Geoff Gundy. And it was a great episode.
It was a great episode. And you know what? I was in lieu of some basic banter, I was going to actually reference the episode. So is this too early for us to give everybody a chance to go back and listen to episode 291?
No, I think this shows that we're being a little more professional. We're giving them a chance right off the top. Usually we forget, and it's like halfway through the episode, and we're like, oh, we should let you go back. But you know what? Let's do it right away. Here's your chance. We're going to take a timeout so you can go listen to episode 291. So when what we talk about makes more sense. Okay, we're back. You've listened to the episode. Now everything is going to make sense.
Welcome back to now. And if this next bit spoils it for you, it's your fault.
That's right.
Geoff Gundy found out that Peter Cetera left the band Chicago in 1985 in the worst possible way you can, which is while interviewing the band Chicago 20 years later. Very good episode. A couple of good topics. So, Dan, let me ask you this. What in comedy can be taught and what cannot be taught?
Ooh, that's a good question, Josh. I think you're definitely onto something there. There's certain things that can be taught, certain things that can't. I would say starting with things that can be taught, technical things in comedy, as far as like, moving the mic stand, using the stage, things not to do on stage, like, messing with the mic cable, things like that. Joke writing, you can teach creative writing. You can teach joke structure, your setup, your punch. You can teach writing prompts and things like that. Now, on the other side of that, things that I don't think you can really be taught in comedy, and that's one of the biggest ones, finding your voice. That's something that comes over time, something that you have to kind of do. I don't think this one's kind of in the middle, but stage presence is another one that can't really be taught. You can definitely, from taking classes, you can help improve and build that confidence for your stage presence, but that's still something that you learn as you go. And then I would think, crowd work's another one to me that I don't think can be taught. I think there are things you can learn about crowd work, but to actually get better and do it, it's one of them things that, again, over time, that kind of comes. What about you? What are some things that you think can be taught, can't be taught?
One time or it was during a mic, I went up on my, and I did my set. I recorded it, and a comic that I respected was there, and I said, "Hey, if it's all right, I'd like to send you a recording of my set, and maybe get some feedback from you." And this is calling back something that we discussed last time on the last
week.
So, right. So it was one of those things where, I was just soliciting some feedback. He actually said no. So I can't do that because I can't tell you how to be you. And, while that's not my question, that's not what I was asking him. And I think any comic can give another comic feedback if they want to. I do understand what he was saying, which is, look, your jokes are they're going to be done out of your voice. And I'm not going to have a better way for you to sound like yourself, right? So whether he understood me or not, or whether it's the right thing or not, it still kind of hit home to me that there is some truth in that, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
only you can determine your voice. That's one of those things about comedy, right? Like, and you just described it. It's you have to do it. There's no substitute for the real thing. There's no way to simulate a stand-up comedy environment. You can rehearse a play and you can practice a play, but just because the art form is so incredibly unique and impossible to simulate, that makes learning it a something that you can only learn while doing it. Now,
Yep.
the structure, the rules, I think are all things that you can do. And I think what Jeff's trying to do, I think is great. And I think his mission is to, how do I make the learning curve of comedy as short as possible?
Mm-hmm.
And so he's cherry picking some things to learn. And you just named a bunch of them. I won't name them again, but I think those are right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it really, because kind of going into that too, as far as like things you can and can't learn, another one that I would say is how to be funny. I don't think you can teach being funny. You can give
Yeah.
somebody the tools, and I don't even know if you can learn to be funny. I mean, maybe you can learn to be funny, but while you're on stage. But I think that's, you have to have there's other elements of just being funny. I feel like, you can go tell a joke and make it funny, but are you being funny, or are you just saying something funny? And I think,
Yeah.
there's probably a real fine line, and some people would probably disagree with me on that, that thought process there. But I think, you're either funny or you're not, and you can't necessarily be taught to be funny. You can be taught all the tools that you can use to be funny,
Yeah. You
but
can learn how to write a joke. You cannot learn how to write your jokes,
Mhm, exactly.
right? Like that basic structure is all there, but once you go into like your own story and how to punch up some event that happened to you, there's really just no way to you can't be taught that. Yeah,
Mhm.
and how to be funny. I think there's how to be funny and there's how to be a comedian, right? Like I think anyone who tries stand-up comedy has probably been told at some point in their life that they're funny
And they should be a
and
comedian.
they should be a comedian. Exactly. And then, they get up on stage, they take 8 of their friends to an open mic, 8 friends just pour out laughter at the first joke, even though it's not written as a joke and there's no structure to what we're doing. And then they get tired about 30 seconds in, and then it's 5 minutes of a terrible experience. And it's because you can't be taught how to be funny on stage or to read a room, like being able to judge what the audience is telling us.
That's a very good one as far as something you can't be taught. Reading a room is definitely a skill that you have to acquire over time, as you gain experience. Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incorporating some of the things that, and I think Jeff actually refers to a comic. I don't remember who the comic was, but he was talking about a particular comedian that he respected. And one of the traits of that comic that he calls out is that comic's ability to blend the very organic conversational nature of being in the moment and talking
Mhm.
to the crowd with his or her actual written material. I know
Oh,
exactly what he's talking about. And I know you've seen that too, and you can
oh,
do it.
absolutely.
But that's not something that can come out of a class or any kind of coursework. You just over time have to develop the ability to say, all right, this audience is this audience, and that's how it is. And I've got to find ways to engage them by reading the room and then working my material in the right ways.
Mhm. Yeah, like you said, it's all experience. Those are things that you have to go and do, and as you have different experiences, different variables happen in comedy, and you say a thing, and you go back, listen to the tape, and you're like, oh, that's where I lost the audience, and then just observing audiences. The more you observe the audiences, the easier they are, you know, to kind of read. And part of that is, and if you're serious about comedy, I highly recommend that you're in the room when other comics are up,
Yeah.
because that's really how you can really start learning to, you know, getting that experience and seeing these audiences to develop that skill to read a room,
Yeah.
because you can see what they are and what they aren't responding to from other comedians.
If you go to 5 open mics, whether that's a week or a month, if you go to 5 open mics, make one of them your crowd work open mic. Like, that's not necessarily something you're
Yeah,
being taught, but
that's
it
a
is
good idea.
some structure for learning. Like, you can't be taught everything, but you can learn everything,
Hmm.
right? So some structure for learning, when I go to open mics, there's an open mic, it's on Mondays. It's amongst like it's one of those that like you can have a good set, you can have a good night, but it doesn't happen often because of what it is. It's mostly comics, and the people who are not comics are there to play pinball in the same
Hmm.
room, play darts, and they're not expecting a comedy show. And it's
Yeah.
just a complete train wreck of interests, and you're gonna lose. So
Yep.
do
Just go
crowd
out and do
work
crowd work.
do crowd work on that mic and just work on your ability to do that. And if you can work your material into it, great, but just plan on that being that show. And then the other 4 are for your material, and kind of get good at identifying what mics are good for what your goal is at that mic. And we've talked about this: have a goal.
Yeah, have a goal. Yep, at those open mics. But I really like that's a good idea. If you go to 3 to 5 open mics a week, have a different goal like that in mind. Whether go to one, do crowd work, go to another, do your actual jokes with your setup punch. Maybe on another one you're just playing around with how you present yourself, with your stage presence, or trying to find your voice, or whether you're being goofy, or different deliveries, or whatever it might be. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really good suggestion. I like that. I mean, I might
Yeah.
even try that,
Yeah,
start
I
doing
recommend not trying it,
that.
and this is less for you and more for anyone listening who's getting into this, but I recommend not doing that at mics where the people programming the mic are doing a good job getting an audience there,
Oh, absolutely. That is a
right?
very good point to throw in there. Because
Yeah,
yeah, if there's a good audience and they're actively listening and they're there for comedy, you don't need to mess around and
yeah,
necessarily risk having a bad set because you might not be good at crowd work. Definitely make sure, like you said, if it's an open mic where you're probably not going to be able to achieve any of your other goals actively because the crowd's doing a bunch of other things, like in your example, playing pool, playing darts, playing pinball, like everything
yeah,
but listening to comedy. Those are the times you want to take those opportunities to mess around, because low stakes is a good way to describe it. You want to
right.
take the shows that are low stakes, not shows, but open mics that are low stakes. Use them ones for doing that real experimental stuff.
That's right. Occasionally, you find somebody who consistently gets an audience to watch an open mic as if it's a real show. That
Yep.
does exist. And go, all right, well, my stuff that's near the end of the joke assembly line, where it's been tested, and it's starting to get to a point where it needs to be part of my paid material. I got stuff in that locker that I'll bust out for those shows because I feel like they're ready. But
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think when you have a good crowd there, you should be trying to do, like, definitely, because we want to develop as comedians, you should be trying some of your new material. But when you have an opportunity to perform, even at an open mic, and it's a good crowd, don't do all new material. Don't, take that opportunity to maybe throw something in the middle, but do some strong material. So because then that's your opportunity to see what it's like to be on a regular show, especially if you're at that level where you're just mostly doing open mics,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
gives you get that taste, yeah.
Let's go.
That's what I did. And one thing I've been trying to do, I have been trying to do new material, and I did. And for me, it's about getting out of the comfort zone because
Yes.
I'm easily, and I think it's for a lot of comedians, it's easy to slip into what works. And so I've been trying to push myself to do, okay, I got to try some new stuff. And that's what I did. Yeah, I had a little showcase last night. I, opened with some stuff, newer stuff, or not newer stuff. I opened with some proven stuff, but I opened in a different way, which that was a mistake on my part. I shouldn't have opened the way I did. I tried to do something different for my opener, didn't work, but did some proven material. Then I threw some newer stuff in the middle, and that newer stuff, it got some good reaction. It definitely needs work, and it's coming along, which is good. But
Yeah.
then of course, then I ended on some proven stuff. So
I
think that's
when I listened just over the last couple of minutes of this callback, when I was listening to the show, I came up with another question, and it was, what to look for in a good comedy class?
What to
thoughts
look
about
for in a good comedy class? Well, I think don't do no, just kidding. I'm not that guy. Comedy classes are dumb. No, that's a lie. Anybody that has listened to this podcast on a regular basis knows that is not how I feel about comedy classes. I think if you find some value in it, take them. But if you're looking for a comedy, things that I would look for, number one, who's teaching it? What's their relationship to comedy? Have they done anything in comedy? And when I say that, I mean, do they have any legit credits? What have they done in their career? Because it's easy, because that's the one thing we see in comedy a lot, especially with comedy classes. Comedy classes and festivals kind of get put in that same sphere of money grabs. Now, within that, there's definitely, you got that Venn diagram of you've got comedy classes, festivals, money grabs, and then there's that small portion where there's some good, legit comedy classes and festivals.
that are interesting.
So you definitely need to, do your research on them. But like I said, first thing I always look for is who's teaching it, what have they done? If somebody has been doing comedy for a year, 2 years, and suddenly they're teaching comedy, I'm going to be a little suspicious of that comedy class. Where's it being taught? That's another thing I would look for. Is it being taught in a comedy theater, like an improv and comedy theater? Is it being taught out of a stand-up comedy club? And even so, if it is, then the next thing you want to look at is that a legit club? Is that a legit, theater? Or the instructor, we've already talked about instructors, but the venue where it's being taught. Cost, always look at cost. If it's super expensive, if they're asking for $150 a class, and there's 6 classes and it's going to cost you $1,000, definitely keep that in mind. And this isn't always easy to do, but one thing you can look at too, and this is, if it's a good instructor, if you ask questions, they're going to answer them. But you want to look for a class when you reach out and ask questions about potentially taking it, of them being responsive and wanting to answer your questions. Because if they don't want to answer questions that you might have, that's a good indicator that it's probably just a money grab for them and they don't really care. And I think with that, another thing I would look for is any comedy class, or most comedy classes, if they're pretty legit, they will have an orientation class where the first class is free, but it's not so much a class as it's more orientation of, hey, this is what we're going to be teaching. These are the principles that we're using. We're teaching out of, say, this book, or, I'm following the basics of this comedian or whatever it might be. We're going to do it for 6 weeks. Here's the syllabus of the class. schedule and they have it all laid out, things like that. That's a good indicator that whoever's teaching that class serious about teaching comedy.
Good. Yeah. And you can always ask another comic that's taken the class for some
Mhm.
kind of referral or recommendation.
And
Yeah, those
that's,
are all
yep. I
those
was
are
just
good
going to add
pieces.
to that. Yeah, they are big pieces. I was just going to add to that that's a good point too. That you want, if you know somebody who has taken a class, ask them. Same thing we talk about with festivals. If you're curious about a festival and whether you should apply, the best way to find out what that festival is like is to talk to somebody that's been in it and get their experience. And then you got to make the best informed decision you can on whether or not you want to do it.
Right.
Another thing I think I look for in a comedy class would be just trying to think if there's anything else. Because I mean, it's hard to like really gauge. The main things is who's teaching it, what they've done, where it's being taught. Reputation. That's another thing too. And do they have references? Who's teaching it? Do they have people that are vouching for them? Have they have like testimonials from other students? Who have they taught? We talked about talking to people who've taken the class, but who have they taught? Have they taught anybody that's done anything in comedy themselves? And you'll see that a lot. There are quite a few comedy instructors who have taught classes, and then comedians that were in their class eventually blow up and get famous, and so
Yeah.
not to say that it's because they took that class, but that's still a pretty good a vouch for that class.
Right.
It's definitely puts it up there where you might want to think about that class. So I think I think that pretty much summarizes it. I just can't really think of anything else that I would really look for in a class. Anytime anybody's teaching anything related to comedy, my first thing I'm who's teaching it, what are their qualifications to teach this class? And that goes for improv, it goes for comedy classes, it goes for business side of comics. How long have they been doing comedy? What's qualifying them to teach this class? So you got anything to add to that?
No, I think that sums it up. Just, making sure that we are able to, it sounds like all the things we've talked about are in an effort to validate it with data points outside of what that class is saying,
Yep.
and references, people who've taken the class, and then there's all your own personal preferences, like what your budget is, when it is, if you can
Hmm.
go. Like,
Yep.
obviously you've got to gauge those different pieces, but I think that's pretty comprehensive.
That just actually reminded me, though. There's one other thing that I would look for, and that is there a class showcase? Are you getting a chance if you take this class at the end of it? Do you get an opportunity to perform in a comedy club? Because that's the
That's
thing.
true.
That's the thing you should definitely look at. If you're taking a class and you're not getting any opportunity to do, because most comedy classes at most like comedy institutions will have a class showcase at the end of the class where all the students get to invite their friends and family. Usually they don't sell tickets. And that's if they do sell tickets to those shows, that's might be a red flag of the class. But most will do these free shows where you get to invite your friends and family and you get to go do your 5 minutes that hopefully you constructed in that class. And so if you get that opportunity, that's definitely something you should be looking at.
Yep. Cool.
So awesome. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Between Bombs. We will be back next week with a brand new episode. We have Chase Tressler on the podcast next week. Fantastic comic here in Loveland, where I live. Uh, Finally got a local on the podcast. And we had a great conversation. So that's what's coming up next week. And just a reminder to everybody. If you're listening to this, you already know we're back to the weekly episodes. So we'll be back with callbacks in 2 weeks. So next week, we're back with a regular episode. 2 weeks, we'll have the callbacks for that episode. Thanks for listening. Make sure you like, subscribe, follow the podcast wherever you get them. Check us out on YouTube. Do all the things. And we'll be back next week with an all-new episode. Have a great week.
This has been a Dan Bublitz comedy production. Roar.